I remember my dad is a psychologist. I remember being a little kid, he was a professor, sitting in the back of his classroom and just filling out this little questionnaire that had all sorts of true, false things. It was so long. And then I go to graduate school and I realized my dad was giving me the MMPI to keep me occupied when I was like 5 in his classroom. I'm like, Dad, I don't think you're supposed to do that.
540 odd.
That's so funny because so many people would
questions.
think that was a trauma.
Awesome.
No.
They'd be going like to some sort of therapy just for that.
No.
Yeah,
He
I
was
know.
just trying to keep me occupied.
That's totally dig your dad. Is your dad still alive?
He is still alive.
I really
I
want to
just
meet
played
him.
with I just played with Legos.
Whoever it is that turned out Jenna Lejeune, I'm for.
Yay for that.
Welcome back to Beyond Well, everybody. I'm Sheila Hamilton, along with our co-host, Dr. Jenna Lejeune, the person who took the MMPI. Is that what you called it?
Yeah. That was the MMPI was my babysitter as a kid.
And Dr. Brian Goff.
Hello.
Brian, are you still in a ton of boxes?
No, I've been making quite good progress on the boxes.
Yeah.
Staying up a little too late, getting up a little too early because the boxes are calling my name.
Of course.
But we're just about done.
Yeah. Brian just recently moved and he has OCD, parenthesis.
I like to think of it as screws just a little bit tight.
This is a program for people who want to learn more about our interior lives. And every episode, we're attempting to build on that emotional toolbox. And I come to the show from the perspective that we're all on a spectrum of mental health, from days when we feel really outstanding to days when we really need some help. That's what we're here to do, is talk about how we get back to well-being as our default position. And I was so thrilled because it was Dr. Goff who took the lead on bringing you in, Robyn, Cruz.
Thank you.
And then I looked at your website and I thought, oh my God, I want to meet this woman. You're amazing. First of all, you're going around the country in a bus with 2 kids?
Yes. And one just turned a teenager.
That is
13
amazing.
last week. So holy crap.
Yeah. Talk about why you decided to do that and what the process was like bringing the kids and your husband on board for this project.
Yeah, I mean, it started a while ago. I have a history of my own mental health issues, anxiety, eating disorder that I've been in recovery from for many, many years. And as we know, one of the elements of getting mental illness is via your family.
Yeah.
And my father, who incredible man, worked very hard. He came from an era where you never spoke about your problems, you never spoke about your mental health, and you certainly never asked for help. I got a phone call that we had to go and put him into an assisted living. He had struggled with substance use disorder for many years and had a stroke, and he was just unable to look after himself, and we needed to support him. And that was, there's something profound when you see a family member have a life kind of taken into a direction that feels way too soon, and something that you know that that's not what they aspired to. And so when I went back, I remember having a moment of looking at him and thinking, my God, the only difference between you and me is that I have the resources and I get to ask for help. And then when I came back, bear with me here, when I came back, just from the stress of overworking, because that tends to be my thing of what I put myself into if I'm struggling, if I'm kind of exhausted, if there's something I don't want to deal with. I have a way of kind of accumulating stress in my body, and then all of a sudden I'll hit this cycle where I'll go into anxiety and panics. And I remember hitting that wall, and the first thoughts I had were, I shouldn't feel this anymore. I shouldn't have to go through this. I should know better. I'm a mental health advocate. And then the next thought was, my God, Robyn, if you, a mental health advocate, feel that way, imagine what Joe Bloggs feels. Like, can you imagine he doesn't know or she doesn't know what you know, and still you feel that? And then it just really had me reflecting upon my life and what I wanted to do. You know, I've hit 45, and I think there's been a lot of things, a lot of life choices that I've made from the viewpoint of protecting myself and not really claiming it, that somehow having had a mental illness, even as such as anxiety or an eating disorder, has made me feel less than and put me in a small box. And I've done that, and society has supported that viewpoint, of course. And I just, I'm a kind of I don't like society telling me what to do or who I should be. And when I recognize that, I'm kind of, let's go. And so this concept of, well, how do we go out and connect with society, connect with the people that are really struggling the most? My husband says, I think it was a man called John Travis created this quote, connection is the currency to wellness.
Beautiful.
And we really believe in that. And so we thought, well, it's not enough to be behind a keyboard. It's not enough talking to professionals or small groups. How do we get out there and connect with the people that matter the most?
Oh,
And
I love that.
So that's kind of where it was at. And
I still want to know how you convinced the kids.
well, that's hard. That's
Yeah.
hard because Chloe is my youngest, and she's a tween, so she's 11 and a half, and Lily is 13.
Wow.
And listen up. They are all for adventure, but I think this is probably true for all kids. The reality is very different from what the perception is.
Sure.
And, there's a lot to being on a bus and traveling and using it as a business opportunity as well. When you're doing 20 to 30 talks, there is an agenda, and you've got to stick to it, right?
So how are the kids getting educated while you're doing this?
So we tried out many things. We tried out online public school, which failed miserably. However, I will say that it was a public curriculum, and it just tended to be 8 hours of reading a day, and it literally sucked the life out of wanting to be educated for my girls. And now we've tried homeschooling, where we have our own curriculum, which has really been great. But now we're going back, and we're going halfway, and we're going to a private online school for the rest of the year.
That's so wise. I honestly want to have a whole show about living arrangements, because Jenna has given up her big home to live in a mini home. Or a small, what do you call them?
Tiny.
Tiny home. Well, the bus is a tiny home, right? It's 250 square feet.
It totally, absolutely is. You also serve as the director of advocacy consultant for Eating Recovery Center, and this is the only recovery center completely, solely dedicated to eating disorders. That seemed like, are you kidding? In the United States, is there truly only one place?
I think that it depends on the levels of care that people have. So you will see that people have many. They treat eating disorders, but they can only take a certain BMI, body mass index, and they maybe specialize with anorexia nervosa, but they don't specialize in ARFID or bulimia. Eating Recovery Center They treat the sickest of the sick. So meaning they can refeed people that are struggling for life. So they can, or they can treat the sickest of sick with psychiatric comorbidities. And so it's really important because the truth is about eating disorders is I don't think you get an eating disorder and that's it. You have OCD, you have anxiety disorder, you can have borderline, bipolar, you can have, and there's a lot of medical complications that come along with eating disorders.
Jenna said once that I thought was fascinating, Jenna, was when you said if you have a body, you have a body image disorder if you're a woman.
Yeah.
Do you really believe that?
Maybe that is not true. I would love to meet the person who isn't, but I have not met a woman in America who has a body who doesn't struggle with it in some way. It's just part of having a body. And maybe it is also the case that every single man in America and every single non-binary, I'm certain that it is every single non-binary individual who also struggles with it. Maybe it's the same for men. I just have those conversations mostly with women. Having a body is really hard because we live in a culture that is so unbelievably focused on how you look.
Image, yeah.
Yeah,
for sure.
Especially for women.
Yeah.
But I think it's also very important to understand the difference between body image issues and that of an eating disorder. An
Absolutely.
Talk about
eating
that if you
disorder-
would.
Absolutely.
Yeah, an eating disorder is a mental illness. And so it is very different. So, for example, somebody with a body image issue may be unhappy and want to kind of conform to what they think society's body image is, or be disgruntled with it, or even diet. But that of an eating disorder will be dictated. Their everyday thought process, their behavior is dictated by that mental illness, and it kills, So it's very different.
So is the difference the level of obsession with eating or not eating? Is that the difference?
I think it's the level of obsession could be one classification. The willingness in which they are willing to go in order to get that body is another. The medical issues that occur when acting out in eating disorder behavior. Like we don't realize that, but the low potassium, the chronic purging, the starvation, that all greatly impacts our body on a medical, basis.
And your brain. I mean, that's
And your
one of the
brain.
things that happens when people get to the place where they're starving themselves is, your brain needs
Certain
nutrition.
nutrients.
Yeah,
And
you're,
so
you're starving your brain, not just your body.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So
And-
you can get to the place where you have individuals who are experiencing things like they literally look at themselves in a mirror and see a distortion. Now,
Yes.
if that isn't that isn't in the context of eating disorders, we call that psychosis, when you see something that isn't there. And that
interesting.
happens because you starve your brain.
Yes. And I also think that we have to remember too that when we're talking about eating disorder, this is often co-occurring that we said before,
Yeah.
that is underlying that, the behavior of an eating disorder can often be a medication that someone has self-prescribed to
Yes.
get
Such a
that
great-
into control.
I think
right?
that bit is part of the distinction between what we're talking about when we talk about body image and eating disorder, because as you know, that oftentimes the eating disorder behavior isn't really linked to how I look.
Yeah.
It's really kind of, I think of it as almost, at least some of the behaviors are emotion regulation behaviors gone bad.
Yes.
Like I
Oh,
don't,
that's wonderful. Yeah.
right, like I
It's a great
don't
way
like
to
the
say
way
it.
I feel. I'm going to do this. I feel less of the bad thing that I want to feel. I now can have sort of control over my emotional experience. But then the snowball starts rolling,
Yes.
and now it's got control of me.
Yeah.
So, Brian, when we were talking earlier about my love of watching the Blazers, because I can be so consumed by what's happening on the screen, you're describing the thought process behind an eating disorder of, if I can think about what I do or don't eat, then it consumes a thought process that might otherwise have to bring in a lot of emotion I don't want to be thinking about. Is that a similar? Is it a sign of numbing out? Is what I'm asking.
It may be. The trick here is, right, like that we're looking at the way the behavior shows up, the form of it, right? And the question is really, what's the function? And the function can differ from person to person, even though the form looks the same.
Yeah.
So maybe it's numbing. Maybe it's, my life is so out of control, but this I can control.
Yeah.
I used to say that it was like putting on a super cape and hero panties and finding something that worked for me.
Yeah.
It really made my world slow down and feel a little bit more like I had control of it in a world where nothing felt like it had control. So it really was never about the body. Although I kind of bought into that, right? It's easy to buy into what I have to look like that. But that was never enough.
Yeah.
It was always another thing. And it was really, when I think about it, it was the underlying of this chronic anxiety and trauma, really, that I was trying to hide from, and it gave me salvation.
How serious did your eating disorder become? Were you hospitalized?
Oh, that's a tricky question, isn't it? Because we assume that anorexia nervosa is, and I get it. I just want to clarify that we assume that the sickest of the sick is those with anorexia nervosa at a certain body weight, when actually people with bulimia nervosa can be often slightly higher than the recommended BMI and be struggling just as bad medically and physically and definitely emotionally. I would say that I became incredibly ill to the point that life felt like it wasn't easy living anymore.
Wow.
And I think that that's a typical thing for anybody struggling with eating disorder and addiction. I think that that is a very common thing, because we just don't seem to be able to, our behavior is not congruent with our highest values, and it becomes very difficult to live that way.
Thank you for saying that, because so often people will, the support systems will overlook the struggle that the person's having, because physically you don't look like you're sick enough for it to be a real problem. And then also internally, it's like, well, everyone's saying this is really serious. Everyone's saying that I need help, but I'm not that sick.
Yeah.
I'm not that thin. I know a lot of people who are thinner than me, who are lighter than me. I'm fine. It hasn't gotten that bad.
Yeah.
And you know, what doesn't show up in a BMI is the emotional struggle, the hollowing out, and some medical things like damage to your heart muscle.
Absolutely. Yeah. I often say to my clients, I don't do much eating disorder work anymore, but I used to do quite a lot of it. And I would often say I feel more fearful when I'm working with somebody who's really struggling with binge purge behavior than I am with somebody who's struggling with more of that anorexia restriction, because at least with anorexia, I can sort of see some of the suffering in the body show up. But with bulimia, you know, the person who struggles with bulimia, with binge purge behavior, they're on average 10 pounds, quote unquote, overweight. And so they're like walking around in the world and they look like, you know, a quote, normal person, but the suffering is still so there. And absolutely, you are right, Brian, there are real medical concerns that are going on. You worry about your esophagus, you worry about the heart.
Yeah.
Your teeth.
Yeah, your potassium.
Absolutely.
This is a good spot, though, to interject that we're, for the sake of discussion and I think shortcuts, we're using these labels like anorexia and bulimia to kind of be a shorthand version of what we're talking about. But for the listener, this isn't like we're going to draw blood and be like, oh, you have the anorexia or you have the bulimia. Yeah. These are clusters of behaviors that hang together consistently enough that we can say, oh, just so that we move along in the conversation and don't have to describe everything functionally, let's call this bulimia. But of course, one person who technically meets quote unquote criteria for bulimia nervosa looks really, really different than someone else who also meets criteria. And then there's all these overlaps.
There is many overlaps.
Many overlaps.
We don't want to forget, too, that just because we're saying that somebody has bulimia doesn't mean that they don't have restrictive tendencies of that anorexia nervosa. So it is a complicated thing, although in a way it's serving the same purpose.
It absolutely is. And then there's this whole kind of cluster of orthorexia, this being incredibly sort of over-controlled and obsessive about quote-unquote clean living or healthy eating, where, again, some of the same functions are coming out, but, overeducated rich white guys that write the DSM didn't put that one into the book, so it's not a real disorder.
But I think the point, the thing of let's keep an eye, I love that, let's keep an eye on the function of these behaviors and the overlap, and that we're ultimately talking about like lots and lots of people who are all really different from each other.
Yes.
As opposed to getting caught up in, oh, well, I don't have that I have this other thing.
Yeah.
As though these things are codified
Yeah.
and sort of quote unquote real.
What worked for you? What was the breakthrough when you began to allow yourself to think or be differently around your eating disorder?
What do you mean
Like,
worked?
was it a type of therapy? Was it
For recovery?
Yeah. Was it like, I want to start talking about the process to recovery? Because I've heard so many people say, it actually wasn't being hospitalized. It was that I got a boyfriend and I felt loved. And then I was having regular meals and I began to relax around food.
Yeah.
Like, their life circumstances changed more than the treatment changed.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly think treatment is important. And I think every year we see, especially in the eating disorder field and in the mental health field in general, we're seeing amazing new treatments that come into play.
Like, I heard somebody talk the other day about a tapping treatment, EDM. Do you know it? Okay.
Sorry, if you had seen Brian and I, we might have been wincing a little.
But the point is, does it really matter what it is that begins to work for people if it begins to work and they can build on what's working?
When a bird and a book disagree, follow the bird.
Meaning?
mean, if it works,
Yeah.
then it works.
Yeah.
And to say like, well, that's not supposed to work,
Right.
it still works.
Mm-hmm.
That
Yeah.
being said, treatments are not equivalent.
Exactly. So this is a really good topic in mental health in general because, and especially when we look at, say, mental health disorders and substance use disorders, we think that we have the monopoly on what recovery looks like. So, for example, for many years, we thought that those who struggled with substance use disorder, that 12-step was the monopoly
Right.
for treatment, when actually, newsflash, 12 steps is actually not a treatment.
Yeah.
However, it has supported many, many people. And there are 25 million people currently in the United States walking around in long-term recovery, and only 5% of them went to 12 steps.
Yes.
And
Wow.
so
Wow.
Thank you. Absolutely.
so let's put it in perspective. The problem that we have in regards to mental health in general is that we don't have enough education on the amount of treatments and variable pathways that there are to recovery. And it is not a one-size-freaking-fits-all, people. It's just not. And I don't know if you know this, but I am very
Yes.
passionate about this because I think that there are so many people dying that do not know that there are resources out there, that mental health is an issue for many people. 1 in 5 people within the United States are currently undergoing some form of mental illness, and only 50 of them are trying to seek treatment.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of treatment out there. So we just have to be really mindful. What worked for me may not work for other people. You know what I mean?
Oh, I just so love that you said that. And kind of building on that, if you are in some form of a treatment and it's not working for you, probably staying in it for another 5 years or doing it 4 times a week more is not going to make it work better for you.
Exactly.
Try something else.
Yes.
You know, and if you don't know what to try, then a great place to start is where the science says, hey, in general, this thing tends to work for folks. So start there. But if that doesn't work, you know, just really, really, if something isn't working, there are so many other options out there.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I think that we can feel like we fail if
Yes.
we've tried that. And I see many people feeling like they've failed if they've tried a treatment and it doesn't work for them. And it just means that it's not the treatment for them. But there
Not
is
the treatment for them.
Treatment is not a thing. Treatment is a whole bunch of things.
Exactly. It's
And
a combination.
And one of the things that I really love about what you're saying, Robyn, I'm hearing 2 things that often don't go together. One is you are not your struggle, right? This is the whole anti-stigma thing. You are not your struggle. You have a struggle. And actually better than that, you struggle because struggle is a verb, right? Not a noun.
Right.
And it's like, you're not defined by the thing that you struggle with.
Yeah.
I love that.
And what you're struggling with is really serious.
Yeah.
And it's not the kind of thing where someone can just throw a self-help book at you and it bounces off your head and you're better. It's like the I don't know the stat off the top of my head, but with some of the eating disorders, the number of treatments that people have to go through before they finally get a hold on this.
Yeah.
This is a really, I wouldn't say intractable, but it's a stubborn set of behaviors, and it's a stubborn set of thoughts that go with it.
Yes.
And it takes a lot of work.
And full recovery from an eating disorder is possible.
Yes.
And just because you're in recovery from an eating disorder doesn't mean that you're unwell when anxiety or depression or all the underlying things come up that you have to face. It doesn't mean that you've gone backwards.
Yes.
It just means it's another process
There
for
you
you to
go.
get
Preach it.
through.
Beautiful.
Yes.
I want to just read from your blog. You say, our beautiful daughters who will look us dead in the face and ask, Mama, am I fat? Hating themselves beginning at a far too young age. Staring at her, your mouth agape, you can hardly mumble out an answer. Of course, you don't think her body is anything short of beautiful, no matter her size. It's perfect, even though you hate that P word, and encourage her to embrace her imperfections in your eyes. It will never be entirely about fat. Our beautiful daughters may want control. They may be striving for perfection. They may be targets of bullying and believe this is the answer to their problems. They may have anxiety, and this whole not eating thing is serving as a sedative. You must be completely conscious of the fact that eating disorders are starting to impact girls much younger and younger ages because of access to, the kind of Instagram accounts that we probably never got to see until we were, 13 or 14 years old, when we saw people on magazines who we wanted to try to become like. Now girls that are 6 and 7 are starting to try to shape their bodies in this.
Yeah.
How do you can't really speak to them, so how do you speak to their parents about watching out for this?
Well, the first thing I would say is that eating disorders it's not just an environmental issue. So we can, again, it's kind of like the body image thing opposed to the eating disorder. Environment's just one part of it. We have our family, we have our gene pools, and we also have the combination, the epigenetics. And so we have all this kind of, again, the combination lock that actually makes us susceptible to an eating disorder in the first place. I do feel that family have such an important role when it comes to modeling behavior for our children, whether they have an eating disorder in their genes or mental health in their genes or not. My job as a parent is to honor and own my body. And I always say to my girls, and I always advise this to parents, I say this to my girls, listen, there's a whole world out there that is going to tell you how you should act, how you should look, and what you should eat. You don't listen to any of it. You have that relationship with your body. You eat when you're hungry. You'll stop when you're full. And that's all you have to worry about, because that is the most important thing that we have. And so as a parent, I honor that, right? I honor that. I don't touch my body and put it down. I talk to them about situations that are going on with them in their school. Right? So when somebody says, your mom's stupid because she was been given a slice of chocolate cake in their lunchbox, and her mom's a nutritionist and says that their mom, that you're stupid because that will make you chubby when you're older, we get to have a great conversation about that.
Wow. Yeah.
And talk about how there's no good or bad food. Right? Except for fun food is non-nutritional, but that's okay to have.
Yeah.
And paying attention to your own experience of things like hunger and satiety. And we, especially again for women, we teach young girls to not pay attention to their bodily experiences with food or sex.
Right, and especially now too, when there's this whole kind of clean, organic thing.
Yes, right.
Which, listen, there is that debate. Food is in its place, food is medicine, and, so that we have this whole debate. And when we try to take whole food groups out of our diet, for many of us, that can lead to disordered eating. And so we have this debate. But I do believe that talking to our children and allowing them to have their relationship with their body is the best thing that we can do. And I see it work, because I see, sadly, some people will come over, some children will come over, and if there's food that they consider junk food, they will be in our fridge and in our cabinets eating that food because they can't get it at home, whereas my girls can go out and go to a party and not eat cake if they don't feel like it.
I'll never forget having a neighbor kid come over and finding her in our pantry shoveling scoops of sugar into her mouth because she wasn't allowed to have sugar in her home.
Oh my gosh.
So there was like, to your point exactly, what was forbidden was all she was obsessing over.
Yeah. Is there a different message for boys in this? Because we're talking about girls and girls' body image, and I'm thinking, with boys, it may not be weight, although it might be.
Well, that's a really good point, because what we know, studies have told us that although men can absolutely have the same impact in being worried about their weight, generally, it's more about a muscle thing. So the behaviors are often slightly different, but is there a better message than to listen to your body and to have a relationship with your body?
Right.
I don't think so.
Wow. Yeah. Robyn, I want to end on that just because that's like I think we just need to have that as our headline for this conversation. Thank you so much. It was so wonderful to speak with you. I hope anytime you're through on your bus, you stop by.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Robyn.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening. If you want to learn more about the ideas you heard today and find more resources, go to our website at beyondwellwithsheilahamilton.com. And if you enjoyed the show, please like us on iTunes or wherever it is you listen.
Also Podbean.
Podbean people, hello, we're here.